The mountains are like a second home to me. From a relaxing weekend getaway to a trip to a museum, there seems to be limitless amounts of beauty, information, and innovation teeming around every corner of these stony landscapes. That's one of the reasons why I joined this podcast, to learn more about these systems and deliver it right to your ears. I'm Eric Tanner, and you're listening to the Canadian Mountain Podcast. In this episode, we'll talk about incorporating both Indigenous and Western-based research methods in Canada, and why they're so important. And to explore this, I'll be talking to two experts from the Canadian Mountain Network, and what some of their work looks like. But before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to appreciate the land that we work on and the people we work with. The Canadian Mountain Podcast acknowledges that our conversations engage with diverse knowledge holders who live and work on unceded lands and treaties 1 to 11 of Indigenous peoples. We also recognize the historical and ongoing oppression that many different cultures, lands, and nations have continuously faced within Canada. We hope to continue our work to help decolonize, change, and inspire media platforms to further collaborate with Indigenous peoples through storytelling and partnerships. Did you know there are thousands of different research methods used in the study of our mountain systems? The mountains are some of the most untouched and pristine habitats in the world, and are witness to some of the most intensive and diverse methods of research in the country. In the study of mountains and their ecosystems, there are a variety of unique ways to examine everything surrounding these rugged formations. The predominant method used in scientific study has centered around Western methods of research, which have been practiced and refined since the Enlightenment era. However, Indigenous methods of research have often been underappreciated, and in some cases, even excluded in the investigation and examination of mountain systems. But this notion is changing. That is what we will be tackling on today's episode of the Canadian Mountain Podcast. Our first guest, joining us from the Northwest Territories, is Leon Andrew, a Shuta-Gotenay elder with the Tulita Dene Band.
Yeah, my name is Leon Andrew. I live in Norman Wells. I was born and raised in Tulita. I'm Mountain Dene. And I'm a member of Tulita band members, Dene band members. And currently I just do a little bit of work with Glen in helping him with traditional knowledge and stuff on his work.
Also joining us is Glen MacKay, the territorial archaeologist and manager of the Northwest Territories Cultural Places Program.
My name is Glen MacKay. I'm the territorial archaeologist with the Culture and Heritage Division of the Department of Education, Culture and Employment with the Government of the Northwest Territories. I'm also a research associate with Aurora College. I'm speaking from my office in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, which lies in the Chief Dry Geese Territory of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation.
I met up with Glen remotely and Leon over the phone to talk about their unique methods of research and why incorporating the two are vital to the study of mountain systems. So, I was just wondering, how do you explain what traditional knowledge is?
How do you explain traditional knowledge? And for
Yes.
me, like it's a way of being Dene, growing up on the land. You learn from the land, then you learn from the water, the air, everything. The whole nature you learn from that perspective. And traditional knowledge in those terms, for me, on the land traditional knowledge and human traditional knowledge, everything's combined. What traditional knowledge mean to me? It's a knowledge system that the Aboriginal people or Indigenous people use for generations. And they learn to survive off the land without difficulty. I see.
Can you tell me about your work and what knowledge systems or traditional knowledges that it employs?
Well, on here, for me, my traditional knowledge is based on the Mackenzie Mountain Range, central Mackenzie Mountain Range, that my grandparents and my father and so whatnot have grew me in those areas. And from that, we learn about ways of and tools that they used to hunt with. So that's what I can go that far, and maybe Glen can fill in the rest.
Sure. So our Canadian Mountain Network project is called the Shoot-A-Goat-Nay Cultural Landscape Project, and like Leon said, it takes place in the homeland of the Shoot-A-Goat-Nay or Mountain Dene in the central Mackenzie Mountains of the Northwest Territories. And our project has two components. So we're trying to create detailed records of special archaeological hunting sites that may be at risk of climate change related landscape changes like increasing forest fires and the melt of alpine ice. So we've been working at wood fences that were used to funnel caribou and sheep towards kill sites, and also at alpine ice patches where people hunted caribou in the past. The other component of our project is to compile information on Chautagotinay geographical place names, which we hope to move forward to become official place names in Canada. Um, so Leon and I are leading this project together. So I think we bring both Indigenous and Western perspectives and technologies in the way that we're trying to interpret how some of these hunting sites worked.
How have different knowledge systems or traditional knowledge impacted what you do?
Way on here. For me, I learned that working with the archaeology, as I have learned a lot from them, how they do their work. And as we, like I said, we provided knowledge about the landscape that Glenn mentioned. And there's certain landscape are just natural formations, so that hunters can use those landscapes in their advantage. So that's what I find it very, very good to be working with scientists. I see.
Sorry, as a researcher who's not from the Chautagotinay homeland, well, I have very little experience of the landscape and the animals and weather patterns and travel routes and things of that nature. And whereas Leon's traditional knowledge is the result of countless observations of and interactions with the land and the animals, and there's knowledge that's shared over many generations. So I think when we come to one of these hunting sites, Leon's knowledge really helps us understand things like why was the hunting structure put where it was, and sometimes it was because it's close to a mineral lick, or it's along an important migration route, but also how did the structure work with the local topography. So I think another thing that I've learned a little bit about from working on the land with Leon and other Indigenous elders in the Northwest Territories is also how to conduct research on the land in a respectful way. So, for example, leaving offerings or paying the water when traveling on the land, as well as leaving offerings when we remove samples from archaeological sites. And, I think I've also learned a little bit about how to conduct research in a safe way as well, from the traditional knowledge that I've that's been shared with me in terms of uh, traveling safely and understanding the weather and how that can impact our work on the land.
Why do you both think it's important for listeners to learn about Indigenous knowledge systems and traditional knowledge as well as Western systems and traditional knowledge?
For me, again, Lee and Andrew, why it's important for a listener to see the ways of the Indigenous people, how they make their homeland, um, the way they understand it. The land has provided for our people so much. so much over generation and generation. And in today's world, we do have new way of doing things, and so much of our indigenous people voice sometimes not being heard in the decision making. So through expressing landscape and caribou habitat, and moose habitat, whatnot, people need to know that those important areas, so decision can be made upon from people that have potential to do other kind of work they want. So those can be visible to the nations. We do it in respectfully to the nation's needs. I think that's why we need to voice ourselves more and more. I say.
So, has there been adequate recognition of Indigenous knowledge systems from Western standpoints, in your opinion?
Well, in the past little while, when I say little while, we've been here at the territorial level. We've been working with doing some work, not work, but what we call the water strategy, like for Mackenzie River Basin. The waterways, and they started recognizing the traditional knowledge. So that's good, and I think we've been pushing to use traditional knowledge in decision making in the form of when you get, let's say, for example, maybe the wildlife, in decision making, TKs become valuable for the government. So we've been using a little bit of that information from the Glen perspective.
How has the Shutigotene cultural landscape projects implemented Indigenous knowledge systems and traditional knowledge?
Well, if you're asking about an archive and stuff like that, we did a lot of work in that area. For example, we're talking about landscape. We hope that we can document our story through the landscape on mapping projects that hopefully we get that done. I think that'd be good for us. I say that in a good way because the land's huge, and there's only certain places where you'll find some good harvesting potentials. So if we were to document those, that I think it will. I think we will get there through that the message. Other than that, the school system, maybe they do document language and they're trying to document language. There too, it's taking a little while. So same for us too, getting there slowly.
In what ways are Indigenous knowledge systems and traditional knowledge being successfully implemented in research studies?
The one we're working on is with my colleagues here, Glen and the former buddy, what's his name, Tom. They did the ice patch work in Mackenzie Mountain. This ice patch is back in 2005, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Glen. They started doing that, and that one they did pretty good on that. We found a lot of arrowheads, and we found some the wooden shaft too, and that was something that told a story about the Shutigotene. And with the help of our researchers, they help us identify those arrows, what kind it may have been one time due to the fact that it's kind of worn out a bit when by the time you pick it up. But anyway, that was a really good documentation they did for us. So yeah, there's a book on that too. If Glen want to speak on that, then if not, then you're okay. Then I'll just carry on. Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
that book is called Hunters of the Alpine, and I think Glen may have a copy somewhere, and I have a copy too.
Yeah.
So that was a really good document that it meant a lot to the school in Toledo. They shared with the school kids, so I think they learned a lot from that.
And so my next question is for Glenn. And so it's what has your experience with implementing Indigenous knowledge systems been like?
Um, well, I started working in the Northwest Territories in 2005, and I've been fortunate to work with many of the Indigenous communities in the Northwest Territories, and so it's been a real uh, learning process for me in terms of um, working respectfully on the land and building relationships with elders and other people in the communities to work in partnership and I've learned so much about how to think about archaeology and indigenous land use and those sorts of things from just being able to experience the land with indigenous elders with people that have lived on that land for generations and so it's really over the years um, created a you know helped to form my perspective on how to think about the archaeological record of the Northwest Territories.
How have you incorporated both Western and Indigenous knowledge systems or traditional knowledge in your archaeological work and protection?
Um, well, I think all of the projects that we do at the Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre, where I work, um, they're done in partnership and collaboration with uh, with Indigenous communities. Um, but I thought that I could provide an example from the Shudagotonay Cultural Landscape Project um, into how we're incorporating traditional knowledge into interpreting some of these hunting structures that we're working on. And some of the hunting sites, like the fence sites and the ice patches, that were probably used over and over again for hunting, and in some cases to harvest a lot of animals at once. One of the puzzling things is that we don't really see evidence of this in terms of big deposits of animal bones near the fences. And, we do find caribou bones at the ice patches, but they all seem to be from like natural wolf kills. Like none of them have evidence of human butchering. And that was kind of a real mystery to me, because I would just think at these sites that were designed to hunt a lot of animals at once and um, and that were used over and over again, there would be all of this archaeological evidence of caribou bones and sheep bones. But when discussing that with Leon, he told me about the importance of keeping these kill sites clean, and that if you butchered an animal in near the fence or on the ice patch, the blood that was left behind would probably prevent other animals from coming back to that site, so it would be a less productive hunting site in the future. So what was happening was that people were moving the bodies or the animals away from these hunting sites before they were butchered. So that's just an example of how working together and was able helped us to really interpret what we were seeing at these archaeological sites.
Why do you believe it is important to include Indigenous based knowledge methods or traditional knowledge into Western forms of research?
Leon here. Why I believe it's important. I think you know the history of the Dene people need to be known up here, especially in the north. You know, from ourselves, I don't think many people know that we exist. So when we document and find a way to have our voice heard, said that already. And it needs to get out there that we know we do exist up here in this big country, and we still do. And it's always good to have a partnership like Glen to come and help us look at some of the artifacts to understand more about our way of life, how we existed from generation to generation prior to European. Those are very interesting findings, if you would. You know, people need to know that. I don't think people do understand that or know that, from my perspective. Thank you. Yeah, having said that, again, yeah, you know, just this summer coming, you know, it'd be 100 years since our people signed treaty with a newcomer into the country. So, you know, there's a lot of history. I must say, thank you.
What are some ways Western knowledge systems might have helped the use of Indigenous knowledge systems or traditional knowledge?
How would it help us?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, sometimes that's very hard to interpret it because, you know, those are your questions kind of written backwards for me, your sentence. And
Oh.
so we're kind of trying to figure how Western science help us. Yeah, that's an interesting question. How would it help us? I think identify. If we come to artifacts and stuff like that, Western science really help us identify the history of an area that people have existed one time or another. And they even go as far as looking at some of those sites. They estimate how long it's been there. So I think that Western science has helped the Indigenous people a lot.
So, moving on to our final topic, which is bringing both Indigenous traditional knowledge and Western knowledge systems together. So, my first question is for both of you, and it is, what lessons have each of you learned from working together while using both knowledge systems, Western and traditional knowledge?
Leon here. Our knowledge is very different from Western researchers, science. You know, we can use them both, but like I said, to interpret them and braid them together, that's really hard to do because we do things side by side, like, you know, similarity, but you know, one is ancient and one's new science. Pretty hard to put it together, but if you work with both of them, you know, you can achieve a lot of things at a time like this when the weather, climate change, for instance, for example.
Is there any work that still needs to be done by Western knowledge systems to incorporate traditional knowledge better? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, well, like, earlier I think I said, you know, we're trying to incorporate our system into the system of the government. We're still working on it. You know, we're gaining, but it's kind of slow. So once we do that, I think this might be helpful. You know, what do we do on the land? Like the project itself, Glen and I are challenging. Put that into together. Put the landscape, document the landscape, and the story will come out of it. And the caribou fence, the story will come out of it. I think that will need to go. I think our people need to find a way to incorporate that into a story and then take it to the archive with museum for safekeeping. I think that's one way of doing it. that's something I'm hoping to see happen in my city.
Okay. And just before we conclude, is there anything that either of you would like to add?
No, I think that was good. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, Leon, the final one is thank you so much. Everything help us. If a question like that, remind us that we're doing what we can to help our people up here is very important for me, especially with the help of the science researchers. Really good for us. The time has changed, like I said. We need to work together and find out more answers out there. And thank you very much again.
That was Leon Andrew and Glen MacKay, two mountain researchers with two distinct methods of study. The two hope to continue bringing together both Indigenous and Western methods of research in their study of the mountains, strengthening the bond of these research methods and furthering our knowledge of mountain systems. Thank you to our guests, and we hope to continue discussing mountain research and why these diverse methods deserve our attention. That's it for this edition of the Canadian Mountain Podcast, in partnership with Mount Royal University. Thanks for listening. This podcast was produced from Treaty 7 territories, of which is immersed in ancient culture and storytelling. With the Canadian Mountain Podcast, our goal is to share both Western and Indigenous ways of storytelling, and we give appreciation to the stories that have been told on this land and shared through generations. Therefore, we give acknowledgement to the hereditary keepers of these lands, the Niitsitapi Blackfoot, Stoney Nakoda, Tsuut'ina, and Métis nations. I'm Eric Tanner, and special thanks to show producer Ethan Ward. Be sure to join us again for more stories surrounding mountain places, whether that be in our own backyard or from across the country. Share and subscribe to get the latest updates on the new season, and be sure to tell your mountain-loving friends and colleagues. You can find us wherever you find your podcasts, and you can learn more about the Canadian Mountain Network at canadianmountainnetwork.ca.